Hello everybody, welcome to yet another interview from the Adventures in Odyssey blog. Today is a very special day for several reasons. For one, I have Tasha here with me.
Hi everyone.
And Ashley.
Hello.
And for the first time, Tasha's husband Jordan.
Hi guys.
And what makes it even more special is today we are interviewing our very first sound designer for Adventures in Odyssey, and that sound designer is Jonathan Crowe. Welcome, Jonathan.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you. I hope it is special. I'm not so sure about that. We'll see.
Well, you've done a lot of great work over the years, and so it's a pleasure to talk to you about it today.
Well, thank you.
Well, Jordan, since this is your first time, how about you go ahead and read the first question?
How did you come to work for Focus on the Family and Adventures in Odyssey?
Well, that is an interesting question. I grew up in Canada, and when I finished high school, I went to a broadcasting course in college and ended up working in production in radio stations, 4 radio stations to be exact, and I was doing radio station production. And it was in a mainstream kind of environment. And I always wanted to work for a Christian-based organization. And in 1987, I had just dropped my wife off at work. She was a nurse, so I dropped her off at the hospital. And as I was coming home, I was just tuning the dial, listening to different radio stations like I like to do, and I heard this radio station way off in the country. It was staticky. You could hardly hear the audio, but on the program, Dr. Dobson and Mike Trout came on, and they said, and we're starting a new program here at Focus on the Family called Adventures in Odyssey, and we're going to play 15 minutes of that program. So I listened to the short piece of Odyssey, and I fell in love with it right there and then. I couldn't believe the quality of the actors and voices that they were using, the writing, and even some of the sound effects and some production elements that they were using. And I thought that's the kind of style of production that I would like to do. But the problem was, as a Canadian, how in the world would I get to Focus on the Family, which was in L.A. at the time? I didn't know how to go about that. That's very difficult to do if you want to come in the legal way. And through a process of events, it took, I'd say, 5 or 6 years. I kept applying, talking to people, and eventually found out that Focus was moving from L.A. to Colorado Springs. And Chuck Boldy, who was the producer of the show back then, wasn't sure if all the production guys were going to move to Colorado Springs. It turned out that they did, and so they didn't have an opening for me in Odyssey at that time. But he said, our creative services department has an opening, and so they hired me. And so for 6 years, I did commercials and promos and that sort of thing for everything Focus. And then there was an opening in 1998 that came up for Odyssey. They were looking for a guy internally, and they knew me because Dave and Mark Drury, Dave Arnold, they were moving on and putting all their energies into establishing radio theater. So that's how I started with Adventures in Odyssey.
Well, I looked on the Adventure in Odyssey Wikipedia before we started this, and it looks like you have sound designed 150 episodes, with the long end part 3, I believe, being the 150th. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, it's a few. It's been a journey.
Is there an episode that you wish you could go back and redo?
I'd like to go back and redo every one of them. How's that? Okay, you're not buying that?
Well, I can kind of relate to that because I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I can totally understand that reasoning.
There is some truth to that because when you finish a show, I'm always thrilled when I get all the corrections done and it finally passes, and then I can move on to the next episode. But it really is never done. It could be better, and I know that. I find it hard to go back and listen to anything I've done for that reason. But seriously, one show that I would like to go back and redo, if I could, was Telemachus. That was a 2-parter. It was done in the early years when I was first starting out in Odyssey. And it was modeled after Patrick, A Heart of Fire. And Patrick, A Heart of Fire was the first show that I ever did. And I remember Paul and Dave saying that they weren't too sure about that show. They didn't think it turned out too well. But after the recording, the actors really lifted it, and it turned out to be an excellent production. So Al Jansen and the writers back then, they wanted to model a show after that, and they came up with Telemachus. And the only problem with it, it just didn't work as well, I don't think, with the acting and the production that I was involved in. And for one reason, there was a lot of battle scenes, and sword fights, and horses, and all sorts of things like that, and crowds. And back then, I was only working on a 16-track machine. And what I mean by that, when I say tracks, that means that there were 16 different layers, if you will, if you want to use that kind of language, and that's all I had. And where today we can have unlimited layers when it comes to putting a show together. And with a show like that, that would have really helped us to have more layers to put in the sounds and getting it working right. Those weren't the only problems that I saw with the program, but that was my part where I thought I could have done better if I could do it again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know when you go back and listen to stuff that you've done a while back, I know the axiom, I guess you would call it, goes is, whoever does their own work, like they're their own worst critic, and I can certainly attest to that.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
But I think you did a very good job with the episode, and I don't think there's anything in that stood out to me that sounded bad at all. And I'm pretty critical listener now.
Well, I'm glad I fooled you then, Austin. All right, I passed. All right, woohoo. Oh, that's good.
So, what episode would you say had the hardest sound effects to create or record?
I think every Odyssey that I put together has a challenge with it, no matter how you may think it is simple or how complex it is. Some of the hardest shows are ones that seem the simplest, because what do you do to try and bring it to life and make it special, So you have to be creative, and a lot of the stuff that you do doesn't really stand out. So there's that aspect. But specifically, as far as hardest sound effects to create, I always go to The Buck Starts Here. Do you know that show, Austin?
Yeah, that's the one with the mud battle, I believe.
Yes. Uh-huh. And it was at a time I left Focus for a few months, and I did that as a freelancer, so I didn't have all the resources of working here at Focus as far as microphones and so on. So that was part of the challenge too. But the other part was just how do you create a mud ball war, and the mud ball shooters were attached to the bicycle, and what did they sound like? Well, first of all, the good thing was that who's to say what it sounds like, because there isn't such a thing. So I got to define that, and so it was an interesting journey putting that together. What I did was, and I talked to other people. They gave me ideas. It wasn't all just my idea. I tried to collaborate on how to go about it, and this really pained my wife. But I went to the grocery store and I picked up about $30 worth of excellent fruit, and from grapefruit to tomatoes to oranges, you name it, anything that I thought would splat. And then I brought it home to our back patio, and I got a step ladder, and around the step ladder I put a sheet, and I put a couple of microphones to record in stereo below the step ladder, and they were protected by the sheet, so that the gunk wouldn't get caught on the microphones. And this is what pained my wife, because I got up on the ladder and then I started to smash this good fruit on the ground, and it was interesting. Some of the fruit made a good sound, and some of it didn't. I think, of course, the watermelon made a big splat. But then the other problem was that it all sounded the same going onto the cement. So I took some liberties, and then I got other materials that I had to throw the fruit onto, like a metal trash can. it sounded like it was hitting a car. I thought, oh yeah, that's good. I brought in wood, and I threw it on wood and started to do that. And so with all those effects, and then in the sound effects server, there were sounds of mud splats and mud, kind of gunky sounds that I could add into it. Because part of the problem with that scene, Austin, was that the scene was about 3 minutes long, which is an eternity. So I wanted a good variety of sounds. And I took a little bit of liberty, and I had a bottle rocket kind of whistle by and then a splat. So that's how I did the mud ball. Then for the shooter, I went to a couple of stores like a sports store to a Walmart, and I picked up various kind of shooters, like an air gun, and one of those stretchy band things that you try and exercise with. It has a real snap to it when you let it go. And so I took the air gun, and it would give the pop, but it didn't have enough of a springy sound. So I took the springy exercise equipment, stretched it out, and let it go. And a few things like that. Putting them together, it sounded like there was a shot that went by. But then I had to do the bicycle sounds too, because the kids were riding bicycles. So I got the bicycle and I would record it, and then there was a bike crash, and I got one of our old bicycles and just threw it down on the ground a few times. So all those sounds put together is how I did the Mud Ball War, which was a real challenge, but I was happy with it when it was done. The other thing I might say, if you want to know about it, is those were sound effects intensive. I just did a show that's going to air at the time of this recording. It's going to run on the club in a couple months. That was a real challenge, but it was a challenge sound effects wise, yeah, but it was a real challenge as far as processing. Take Every Thought Captive. It's a show that's yet to be released, and it was a show that takes place in the bad girl in Odyssey's mind, in her brain, and that's Valerie. So the whole show is in her brain, and her brain is presented like it's a city that's gone bad, and so that posed a lot of interesting challenges as far as processing. And I'll say you'll just have to keep tuned into the club to hear that one, and you can tell me what you think about it.
Wow, sounds interesting. Can't wait to hear it. Okay, Ashley, want to go next?
All right. What's your most used sound effect in Odyssey episodes?
Well, that is an easy one, and it would have to be the Wits End ambience and also the Wits End door. Dave Arnold put the door together, the sound effect of the door, back in 1987, and we still use it to this day. And I think of it as a godsend far as for the show, because if you listen to the show at all, when you hear that Wits End door sound, you know immediately that the scene's taking place in Wits End, no matter what other sounds we put into the scene. So that's been a real terrific thing. And over the years, we've tried to beef up some of those sound effects by going and recording other situation with kids over here at Focus on the Family over in the Wits End area here. I've gone over and done various recordings that sound a little bit different than the original ones that Dave recorded back in 1987. But we can take what he recorded, add in some of the newer stuff, and make it sound just a little bit different and freshen it up a little bit. So those are sounds that we use all the time.
Wow, that's awesome.
What sound or scene that you've made are you most proud of?
There's so many effects, and when the effect works, I'm very happy with it, and I'm proud that it worked, So if I had to single one out, certainly the Mud Ball War was one of them, but there was a show that Nathan Hubler wrote called Swept Away, a two-parter. It just built to a part in the show where the dam broke, and it was a big moment. We led up to it with an episode and a half to get there, so it had to be a big moment, and it was only about 10-15 seconds long, so that was the other challenge of doing that sound effect. And I think we counted it, and there was at least 17 different sounds that I used to make it work within the 15 seconds. So that's one that I'm proud of.
Well, that makes a great segue into the next question. Tasha, you want to ask that?
It's been said in the past that water sounds are some of the hardest sounds to work with. Did Swept Away take longer to put together than regular episodes?
No. Well, it took longer to put together than just an ordinary slice of life type Odyssey. Yes, it did. And one of the challenges with that show, well, there were a lot of challenges, but that you may not think about, was that there were so many scenes where it was raining outside. We were inside, there was rain outside, we were outside. We were outside on Mrs. Kramer's porch. We were also out on the street. We were up at the lake, and that's where we were in the little hut inside, but it was raining, it was wet everywhere you go. And rain is one of those things that looks good in film when you're watching it, and then you hear the sound. But when it's just an audio drama and you don't have the visual effect of it, to create that sound, it was a challenge, because rain can just sound like hiss or just something splatting away. Is that bacon frying, or what is that? So what I did there was I just did a lot of research from our sound effects library and got all sorts of different sounds of rain. And I put them together. I think I had 24 tracks, 24 different layers of rain. And what I was specifically looking for was rain that was hitting some sort of material, because that sort of gave it more of a definition that this is rain. So I had rain that was hitting grass, and then there was rain that was hitting asphalt, cement. There was rain hitting a roof from the outside perspective. There was rain hitting an old porch. There was rain coming down a drain pipe. All sorts of different rains. And then what I could do, and according to the scene, I can mix and match those sounds and make it sound different. So when we were on Mrs. Kramer's porch, I'd have more of the drain pipe and a little bit of the rain hitting the top of the roof. And when we were at Witt's, coming up to Connie's garage, well, there was more of an asphalt, cement kind of sound, but it was slapping up, the rain was slapping up against something. And so that turned out to be a challenge because of the number of scenes where that type of sound effect was happening.
Well, I think you did a great job. That's one of the episodes that you've done that really stand out in my mind is having really, really great sound effects.
Well, good. Thank you very much. And, of course, Nathan did a great job writing it, and it was certainly a team effort. I relied on Nathan to come in, and I'd ask him, is this working? And he'd give me his input and take off, and then I would work on it some more and till we finally got it done.
Well, speaking of working on AIO episodes, what kind of software do you use to edit them?
Well, there's been a number of types of software that we've used down through the years, and the guy who catalogs or libraries all the shows, and he does the final tweaks and touches on the end of it, Rudy Hare. He's had to go through years of producing this show and try and bring it to one kind of format, because it started with reel-to-reel tape back in the day, back in 1987. And we've gone from there to digital DATs to different kind of software packages. But for the most of it, we've landed in what is, I think, considered to be the industry standard audio production software. And that is from Avid. It's called Pro Tools, and that is used in the movie industry, TV industry, music industry. It's a standard. So our studio, for example, in Burbank, where we record the show, they have Pro Tools there, and we record directly to Pro Tools. We have Pro Tools throughout Focus here. I even have Pro Tools on my laptop at home. And so when we're done recording the session, we can take the session and just open it in a session here on a computer. We don't have to do any converting or anything like that. We can just start wailing away on the show. So that's a good thing.
Could you share some memorable experiences from recording AIO?
Well, as I mentioned, we record the show in Burbank, California. That's where our talent is. And so I think every session there's something memorable that goes on, and some sessions go better than others. There's some that are just there's real drama behind the scenes just to get it to work because some people haven't showed up or one actor isn't working out in the part like we thought. But as Nathan Hubler and I were talking about this, one particularly nice moment comes to mind, and this was with Katie Lee, who plays Connie, and we were doing a scene from a show. I don't even remember what the show was, but Katie often says that Odyssey is art mimicking life. She often feels that way. So we were recording a scene with Katie, and it was a scene with a father talking to his daughter. And there was something about that scene that really touched Katie, and she just burst into tears. And there was this kind of awkward silence in the studio, and I was engineering the session. Marshall Younger was directing the session, and I didn't know what to do about it. Fortunately, Marshall had the good sense, and he just stopped the session. He went in, put his arm around Katie, and just talked her through it. And that was a memorable, sweet occasion in the studio.
Well, that's a neat story. You know, and us fans listening to it, the show really affects us, but I guess we don't think too much about how much it can affect the actors and the people working on the show too.
Yeah, and that's something that we really hope happens, and it's something that I'm sure we don't know to the full extent and may not know to the full extent till we're in heaven.
Yep.
What's a typical workday look like for you?
Well, there is no typical workday in some respects. In other respects, I suppose there is, because there's different aspects to the production that we do every time. Like we get a session after it's recorded, and we start doing the voice track at it. And that often takes me about a week to get the voice track edited. And what I mean when I say edited, you probably understand that there's multiple takes done and pickups done for each scene. What our job as sound designers is to take the tracks that were recorded in the studio and put them together into a final take. So we've been given a palette, if you will, of different takes. It's like different colors when you're painting or whatever, and we try and bring it together into one kind of color. And we listen to all the takes, the pickups, and sometimes we'll go phrase by phrase, line by line. And we'll use take one here, take three there, take two, and that's how we piece it together. And we're looking for the performance, we're looking for the pacing. We don't want it going too fast, we don't want it going too slow, depending on the scene and how the scene dictates it. And then after we get that done, then the writer, producer Dave Arnold, Nathan Hubler, they come down and listen to it, and that's really good because they can be a little more objective with the whole thing, and they can see things that are working well, things that aren't working well. We often make edits to the show of things that we thought were going to work, maybe didn't work as well. And what that does, Austin, is it saves time in the post-production when we go to put the show together. If we can cut it at the voice track stage, then we don't have to produce it. So that helps save the time. After I get the voice track done, or we get the voice track done, we do some music notes on the script where we want music to come in, what type of music, we anything particular, or if there's a turn in the drama, as far as the emotion, it goes from kind of serious to a comedic kind of little turn, we'll maybe note that. And then off goes the script and the voice track to the composer. And in most cases, it's John Campbell. He's been doing the show for over 30 years. He's really established the music sound to Odyssey, and he does his magic. He takes our hand scratches and makes something wonderful out with the music. So while that's going on, then we start into doing the sound effects, and we'll try and get as many effects as we can from our sound effects server. We have well over 100,000 sound effects that we've purchased and also that we've recorded over the years that are on the server. So we start to build the scenes. And what we're trying to do with the scenes is make it seem we're trying to draw you in as a listener and feel like you're a part of the scene. And so there's a realism that we're going for. And we put several different layers of just ambiances to give those kind of effects. And then what typically I'll do is we'll go into typically what we will do as sound designers, we'll then go into the Foley room. And the Foley room is just another form of sound design. It's where we act out, give it more the human kind of sound. So we add in the sound effects of the footsteps coming into the scene, any kind of little actions that are going on. If Connie were getting a drink for a kid, well, we'd have the water pour and then put the glass on the table, that kind of thing. We'd sit on chairs. That's Foley. And after that, we often get the music back for the show, put it in. And once we have all the sounds that we feel we need to try and make this show work and make it sound like we're actually on location where the scene takes place, not in a dry type studio, then we'll start the mix. And the mix is just trying to get the temperature right of all the sound effects, getting the backgrounds where they need to be, and then the Foley and so on. So it starts to sound real, like these actors are really moving around in the scene and performing what takes place in there. And so that's an important part of the whole production. And then after that, it goes to a playback. And what we say there, it's a playback reference. And the whole Odyssey team comes down and we listen to it. Everybody has their opinions. We're a bunch of creatives, and so so it can be quite unruly sometimes, as far as people's ideas of what's not working and what should be done. And so that's where we rely heavily on our executive producer, Dave Arnold. He has to weigh everybody's opinions and also the time. We don't want to just keep going on and on. We have to get this show out. So he kind of dictates, yeah, maybe you should do this. Leave that one. That I'm okay with that. And so once that's done, we get it fixed. We get it timed out, so it's timed out for broadcast. It can be a little bit longer for a retail or a club show. And then we put it to bed and move on to our next show. And the process starts over again.
Have you ever acted in an episode of Odyssey?
No, I wouldn't say that. I've never acted in an Odyssey episode. Once in a while, my voice has been in a little part, but I'm not an actor, and I know that. And also, I don't want to be acting, especially if I'm putting the show together, because I would lose objectivity. I would probably be way too hard on myself and not right for the part. So, yeah, I try and stay clear of that for that reason. So I think the answer is basically no, I haven't acted in Odyssey.
Well, that's all we have time for today, and we want to thank you, Jonathan, for taking the time to answering these questions, and for Nathan for recording and setting this up.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about this, and you made me think. Had to think through the process, so that was a good thing. I enjoyed speaking with you guys.